that often when asked, it sort of extracts a kind of mystery as to what it is. Everyone knows one should have one or have it, but what it is and the extent to what it is a mystery very often. So when you come to write your essay, they often say, what is your question? What method? And what do you think your speculation is? Or what you expect your finding to be, or what your originality might be. So question, method, speculation. So methods come from hodos, way or road, or means by which knowledge is negotiated within their respective fields. And the question of method is invariably related to the question of concept of critique, which has its origins in Descartes and his use of methodological doubt. Critique in this context implies radical negativity of thought. The notion of critique derives from the Greek word krinein, which means to separate, to distinguish or decide, and hence be based on assumptions of the possibility of discrimination and distinction. Kant's critique of pure reason was based on the interrogation of prejudice of established forms of authority, and was in turn tied to the notion of human beings being capable of self-thinking and autonomy. Kant termed his age the age of criticism. Could someone tell me the difference between theory and critique? You wouldn't use them
Would it be?
they're used differently, but what's theory and what's critique? Well, it said what critique is, but what?
But I guess critique would be reacting against something that's there, and whereas the theory would be postulating something.
And would critique be more of a breakdown of analysis, whereas theory would be more to do what has been through research, perhaps?
I mean, theory is an ancient word. Its origin is theoria, or even theos, which is God. And it means a sort of disclosure of something. And it's often related to ways of seeing. So in Aristotle, all forms of knowledge have a distinct ocular, like seeing in advance of appearance. Just a minute, let me just. So central to Kant's theorization is that art is aconceptual, and that this is possible suspicion that it is unable, by virtue of its own constitution, construct its own critical tribunal. And if we think about aesthetics, all things that can be claimed to be outside a condition of rule and representation. So it's sort of, because it's aconceptual, escapes the general rule of representation and a Cartesian method. Can someone read? Sharon.
I'm sorry, I'm just pulling up in the car, so I'll be online in 5 minutes to read.
Okay, Kate.
Someone else will have.
What are the concepts that are in circulation around method? Can other concepts be employed to answer the demand that method addresses? Invention, experiment, procedure, style, system, each mediate a potential relationship. But this means that a cluster of words and concepts can function in order to open out a multidimensional task. Defamiliarization was a term that was introduced by the Russian formalist Viktor Shklovsky in the essay Art as Device. This is a modernist approach, which might be termed a method now. The purpose of art is to impart the sensation of things as they are perceived and not as they are known. The technique of art is to make objects unfamiliar, to make forms difficult, to increase the difficulty and length of perception, because the process of perception is an aesthetic end in itself and must be prolonged.
So that was a sort of a defamiliarization, was an attempt to introducing a method. So that's early modernist. So it was in turn related to Brecht's idea of the alienation device. But defamiliarization was writing a text which reminded you that the text was almost a production. So one gets to know the inherent qualities of the text besides what the meaning is.
That's always how it is. You never understand anything. The image is not a closed field of knowledge. It is a whirling centrifugal field. It is not a field of knowledge like any other. It is a movement demanding all the anthropological aspects of being and time. George D.D. Huberman.
So he's making a distinction between knowledge and being, between epistemology and ontology.
Robert Smithson, Rocks and Mirror Square 2, 1971. One's mind and the earth are in a constant state of erosion. Mental rivers wear away abstract banks. Brain waves undermine cliffs of thought. Ideas decompose into stones of unknowing, and conceptual crystallizations break apart into deposits of gritty reason. You can test the physical features of a work, explore its context, inquire about its speculative content, analyze its historical framework, ascertain its aesthetic qualities, and still discover there is much that falls short of developing its dimension of knowability. Or despite exploring the limits of all of this, find that the object of attention is still elusive. When Joseph Kosuth wrote Art After Philosophy, he lacerated a painting as being a mere decorative appendage in the evolution of another coupling, namely the relationship between art and truth. Art as a knowable object? Art was viewed as an analytical form based on the figure of tautology, the circularity of the truth event. The authentic art of conceptualism simply dismissed formalist painting as being empty of all content, historically inauthentic. Within the conceptual gesture, there is the echo of Plato and the Platonic and Cartesian suspicion of the status of the sensible image and effect, but also the attraction towards a correlation between art and philosophy becoming explicit rather than implicit. The truth effect of conceptualism is the ground for the idea that it is the authentic staging, not only for the least condition by which something is art, but also as the staging for the end of art.
I mean, in a way, it was a sort of end game of art as a practice. I mean, the idea art as a tautology, it's a bit of a fallacy.
I've just been reading Lawrence Welsh's book on Robert Irwin, and he sort of ends up in a sort of similar place, I think, where he's ultimately almost making no object or art as such, but more sort of, I don't know, thinking about space and intervention and sort of, yeah. He ends up, after studying a lot of philosophical ideas, in this kind of place as well.
That was very typical of the late 60s. I mean, it's
So-
like the idea of the primacy of philosophy over art.
Shall I continue? Or
Yeah. Next person.
Shall I read then?
Yeah.
Joseph Kossuth wanted to create a work which would demonstrate its principle of emergence in the form of conceptual clarity. He saw philosophy as coming before art and that it might be tested as such. Joseph Elbers, Homage to the Square Apparition, 1959. Joseph Elbers made numerous paintings using the same formal configuration to explore the interrelationships of colour. Elbers undertook this investigation of colour through limiting the format to a single case. Thought is not guaranteed access to being. Being is not inherently thinkable. Ray Brassier.
So in a way, that's a disavowal of Descartes. I think, therefore I am.
Art is what cannot be anticipated. Art comes to presence on its own limit and as this limit. Marta Heikkila. Who does she play for? Where does she come in?
What's that?
Marta.
She writes on presentation.
Okay, great. If you want to know all about Andy Warhol, just look at the surface of my paintings and films and me, and there I am. There's nothing behind it. We thought we knew how to see works of art, teach us that we were blind. Lyotard. Aesthetic theory resides mainly in three conditions. Somehow it is never in the center of things because this would be to assume a stable identity, and with this a representational grid capable of connecting things together. Art is invariably before and after representation, thus detaching it from cognition and from purpose. This process of detachment enables new perspectives to occur so that beauty can serve as a mediation between nature and freedom. This mediation enables the sense of autonomy to develop. Not the facts about art, but instead the speculation of the nature of art. Judgment is not a matter of knowledge of abstract rules, but rather constitutes a capacity that must be exercised. Ali Friedlander. Joseph Beuys, How to Explain Paintings to a Dead Hair, 1965. Art, the before and after of signification. The work of art has a divided essence, being both in itself and outside itself as event. This implies that it never completely open to the act of signification because it is never present in the usual way that other objects in the world are. Art, in this sense, contains its own gesture that links the inside with the extreme outside. In the context, Levinas claimed that the work of art is neither language nor knowledge. Descartes made the claim that method was truth, but Heidegger threw into question this circular relationship between truth and method.
Heidegger saw it as a technologicalization of thought. The idea of method as truth.
A thing is real beyond its conditions of accessibility. Graham Harman. When Descartes stated that I think, therefore I am, he was creating the linking between thinking, epistemology, and being, ontology. You never look at me from the place from which I see you. Conversely, what I look at is never what I wish to see. Lacan. Making a definitive declaration of intent or meaning kills the photograph. Moriyama. True is only what does not fit into this world. Adorno. The flower presents the idea of freedom by a double dislocation, one from concepts and one from purposiveness. The flower does not satisfy an end of mind. It is free from the determinate end of the subject. Freed from the demands of cognition, the flower is able to present our freedom.
So, Jonathan, would this be a Kantian view that the flower and beauty and
Yeah, it's there's 4 different moments of the beautiful, and they're 2 moments: purposeness, disinterestedness, universality, and necessity. But they enable Kant to make a relationship between necessity and freedom, nature and human morality.
But then somebody like Hegel would come at it from a completely different angle, and nature wouldn't be part of it.
But freedom would.
Mm.
I mean, the difference is that, both Kant and Hegel see philosophy as playing a more determinate role than art, particularly Hegel. Whereas Schelling, who is the same time as Hegel, sees it as equal, the same as Heidegger. And there's others who see art as playing a determinate role. So there's a sort of history of controversy just to do with that relationship between philosophy and art. Vanda. Is Vanda there?
Yeah, I'm here. I just, hi. The image appears on the edge of the space between empty and full. As an image, it fails to designate, and as such is without meaning, but it is this quality that marks its singularity. It evades yet entices, draws inwards and yet conceals, offering something that cannot be returned. Jean-Luc Godard stated that montage is the figuring of surprise. Montage as the weave of image, voice, sound, and gesture within a process of discontinuous arrest. Mary Kelly, postpartum document, started 1973 to 1979. Does that mean she never finished it?
No, she finished it within 6 years.
Okay,
It was an ongoing work.
yeah. Mary Kelly set about attempting to structurally and affectively to examine the development of her childhood. This was done through both a process of observation, but also with a model of theorized understanding, which would make the findings systematically visible.
It should be her child, not childhood. I made a mistake.
Yes, quite. Adorno once referred to the work of art to a utopian blink, as if there was still a possibility of an ecstatic relationship between the artwork and history. In a period in which all things appear to be interchangeable, but nothing is secure, the artwork struggles not so much to discover a sense of place, but to imagine the kind of place without the weight of historical loss. No Nazis in Bradford. Don McCullin photograph. Photography for me is not looking, it's feeling. If you can't feel what you're looking at, then you're never going to get others to feel anything when they look at your pictures. Representation schematizes the powers of the subject, whereas presentation suspends the claims of the subject's powers over the material forms. The filmmaker Robert Bresson created a highly refined, sparse aesthetic in which he stripped away the artifice of acting. This led to an aesthetic style in which only the essential features of the narrative were left in place. A question tends to arise as to the difference between developing a style and employing a method. Are they invariably conflated? A style functions as a mode of signature of the work, its deep structure, a resistance perhaps to be reduced to its reading. Method is the putting into place a translatability through which the work might be apprehended. Ludwig Wittgenstein stated, "One doesn't put the question marks deep enough down." Walter Benjamin saw his construction of the dialectical image as the method at the heart of his Arcades project, and yet he was unable to offer a coherent account as to the nature of this figure. As such, it can never be understood as a consistent idea or theory, but what is consistent is the desire to think in images rather than concepts. Things are not as they appear, nor are they otherwise. Buddhist Sutra. The artwork can give rise to a state of paradox or aporia. In this, it presents a knot-like structure that cannot be passed through. Intuition is a philosophical method that is advanced by Bergson, and this is developed by Deleuze in his reading of Bergson. It involves entering into experience directly in order to coincide with it. He is able to align intuition with artistic sensibility and is in turn conscious of the attention that the mind offers itself. Deconstruction is not a method according to Derrida because it does not follow a prescribed procedure or steps which would allow it to reach a conclusion. Instead, it sets out to challenge underlying structures and paradigms that derive from the metaphysics of presence. With the publication of Reading Capital by Althusser and Balibar in the early 1970s came an interest in the idea of a deep reading of a text. The actual publication itself grew out of several interlocking seminar and study groups. The idea of an anti-humanist reading of Marx was predicated on the notion that early Marx was based on his reading of Hegel, whereas the mature Marx was based on a reading of Spinoza. But this difference was important because it was the means of establishing a difference between ideology and science. This implied an ability to purify structures and abstracted the field of the subject. Lived experience was therefore a derided term alongside imaginary experiences of the ego, thus creating a difference between philosophy derived from experience and philosophy derived from concept. What was seemingly at stake is the way that knowledge could proceed in the construction of its own object. It was not just the text itself that attracted attention, but the way the text itself had been generated. It was important because it seemed to be both a process of theorizing, but also a practice. This became known as theoretical practice. The sense generated by method is one of repetition, of securing the ability to produce the self-same, whereas the principal aim of art is the production of difference. All of the arts are a way of producing allure, but there are other ways as well. We should describe what makes artworks different from other kinds of allure. All forms of allure come to our attention through surprise or fascination, since we are not entirely sure what we are dealing with, though we witness its qualities. Graham Harman. At the intersection of sign and rhythm, of representation and light, of the symbolic and the semiotic, the artist speaks from a place where she is not, where she knows not. Julia Kristeva. In order to be art, art cannot simply be itself. It must also be the art of the dissolution of art. Werner Hamacher.
So a lot of questions rather than answers. A lot of questions.
I've got a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
You've got a question.
I didn't. I just wanted to make sure my mic's working so I can do the talk. Well,
Okay.
you were talking about. There was a long slide. It was maybe 2 from last. I can't remember. Who was that? Was that who wrote that? This is the one. Can you go back to the presentation? I can't remember. I was thinking it relates quite heavily to some of the stuff I'm about to talk about. So, maybe it was about method. How did you put it? Oh, well, yeah, I can't remember what you called it.
One of the things I was trying to do is make a distinction between presentation and representation. And representation is not particularly in line with what a work of art is. And if one makes assumptions to do with method and representation, one imprisons the artwork into a grid of translatability or into reductibility. A lot of people get into trouble with that. They try and turn the artwork into a method. I think that's what Cassus did.
I think it's interesting that the questions that the talk generates seem also to be answers in and of themselves. It's like top 10 tips to avoid. You know what I mean? They're all warnings about attachment, I think, to image, to idea, to concept, to formulation, to repeatability.
I mean, probably one should issue top 10 warnings before proceeding to study art. I mean, again, method is often given as a positivist solution to the difficulties of facing up to the pitfalls of aporias and impossibilities and evasions. It's kind of like a cleansing of mind of preoccupation.
I think all of those aporias, etc., they lead to crisis, which lead to individual answers or productions that aren't really answers, because if they become answers, they become method.
Well, you know, stepping back for a minute from art and just thinking about the idea of method. As a scientist, you're faced with 2 methods which need to reconcile themselves all the time, which is theory and practice. In reality, the same is true in art. They need to reconcile themselves. And I don't see them as distinct. I see them as one thing. And actually, science falls down the minute it distinguishes the 2. And I think that's probably true of art as well, and philosophy. So how they can be in tandem and not have one override the other and diminish the other is really the crux of the matter to me. I don't see one. I think if one dominates the other, or vice versa, the creative process disappears, or the meaning disappears into chaos. It's a balancing act between the 2. That is what a methodology amounts to, finding that pathway. So I think that slide I was referring to was kind of alluding to that.
Can I ask, do you think a methodology and maybe is different than a method? like I think and maybe that's just in my head, but or semantics, but I think like a methodology to me seems like a series of steps which one could take that would head one in a certain direction. And then a method would be step A makes this happen, step B makes this happen, so it's more known and contained. So maybe that balancing act, it was really beautifully put, is this, it's sort of like letting the impulse not become the idea all the way.
I think, yeah, when I think of the word method, I think back to those chemistry experiments where you're given 6 things to do and you'll all end up with the same outcome. A very deterministic type of approach to life. But I mean, I think that's true of methodology as well. That's just a grander term. But of course, these are very naive methods. That presuppose that such a determinism actually exists in the world.
Which leads to
Which it doesn't.
positivism. It leads to positivism.
Yeah. I mean, almost by definition, we've already set out, it's a form of Cartesianism, whatever. We already presuppose that the answer exists before we start. We run far too fast in such a belief. It's not true. Right? I mean, the world. That's not. Well, yeah. That's it. I think that's actually been right back from not from the beginning, but right back. If we go right back to. Oh, no, I forgot his name. Who is it who said, I think, therefore I am? Sorry.
Descartes.
Descartes. So if we go right back to Descartes, he rushes with this statement, I think, and without looking at the preconditions of where it came from. And then, what follows X number of years later is Kant, who tries to unravel these preconditions. But again, he jumps too fast, assumes that common sense and that he can use common sense and that the concept controls the understanding or it can control the sensible. Again, he runs too fast. We keep philosophy effectively keeps doing that, getting closer to what is the condition or what is the genesis of all this, which is why I think it often appeals to art, because art almost starts from the opposite position, which is that genesis, or maybe good art starts from that.
Yes, so you're in a process of the early stages of PhD. What do you think you're facing when it comes to the question of what is your method?
I haven't explicitly talked about that per se.
But it'll come.
It'll come. I guess it's, kind of, in a sense, the discussion, what is your question and how is it you're going to go about researching and answering that question. So I guess that's part of method. Yeah, so it seems a little bit removed. Well, actually, it's not. So part of the discussion that I've been having recently with my supervisor, particularly one of them who's more on the art history side of things, has been the difference, and that's why I mentioned Hegel, and the difference between Hegel and Kant and their approach to art and how nature and beauty come into it or not. And so I've been thinking about that and reading about that a little bit. And I guess also, as you know, my interest was originally on the MA was the sublime in art. And now I'm being asked to look at, let's say, affect theory and to think about that, even if I refute it. So I need to understand that a little bit better. So it's still early days for me.
Panda, when you did a PhD, what did you come away with as far as method?
No, a lot of confusion. People, I don't think people really understood what was meant by method, and I think some of your seminars that you went to clarified it. But yeah, I mean, I guess what was proposed was various different philosophers' idea of method. So there was Hegel, and there was Deleuze, somebody was talking about Deleuze and method, and then there was Kantian method, as far as I recall. But I can't just sit here now and give you a little neat summary of that. But yeah, I think a lot of people were confused about it.
So very often they go to a philosophical method as if it solves the question of the relationship between, a sense of the process of making and writing about making an account of a question. So it often leads to a divorce between the making process and the theorization process.
Yeah, I think a lot of people try to talk about the making process, but couldn't, obviously. And so philosophy had more avenues into it.
Also, I raised the question, is style often, philosophical style often conflated with method?
Did you say philosophical style?
Yes, style of philosophy. I mean, in a way, Derrida refutes the idea that deconstruction is a method, which means it is a style of philosophy. I mean, the assumption would be that par excellence, that deconstruction is a method.
Yeah.
It seems to be that the way of answering what is method, yet Derrida refutes it, which is surprising.
Why does he refute it? Because it seems on the outside that would
It
fit.
doesn't give any answers.
Oh.
It undoes structures. It undoes what leads to method. He undoes method in effect. And certainly undoes positivism, that there should be such a thing as an answer available to one if one follows the right procedure.
Where does that lead him then? Where does that leave deconstruction?
I mean, it leads it to a kind of form of radical skepticism, which goes right back to Sophocles, not Sophocles, who am I thinking of? Anyway, early Greek skepticism.
Could that,
Sophists.
What?
The sophists, maybe.
Yeah.
could that sort of undoing of method and positivism, which seems like it would lead to chaos, right? Could that not also turn all the way over into positivism in a different way? Like, I don't know, but I don't know what the term positivism in particular means, but I mean, like, when everything becomes the same and nothing matters, then anything is possible also from that.
That's nihilism.
Excellent. But there, yeah. And there's, is it true there's no hope in nihilism?
Well, nihilism doesn't give rise to hope. It's what it's there for.
A nihilistic
It's a
smirk.
radical strip. You could say it's a radical stripping back of all things.
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, you could argue that Nietzsche stripped everything back and was a nihilist, but I think in order to find something productive, he needed to go there. strip things away. Maybe he went mad before he could actually make productive use of it. But maybe Deleuze, I think, would argue that it's from that place that you will see through the dialectic or whatever and find the true genesis. It's only by stripping away that you can actually find. You need to go back to the chaos to find the true meaning out of that chaos. The true genesis, and that's what he would claim that Kant failed to do.
Which is his idea of diagrammatics as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's the same thing he's going to find underneath. That's what he claims the artist is going to, and the philosopher is going to find underneath if they look deep enough, that's where they will form their painting, right? Beneath the canvas, beneath the surface. They need to go back to the true genesis in order to find the idea. So, I mean, I think at some point he was touching on nihilism in his philosophy, but he turned away from that. I'm now talking about Deleuze. Maybe we all have to go through our nihilistic phase.
There is something about needing to hit rock bottom in order to see clearly enough to kick off of it, to get a new perspective. And
yeah, I think there's something in that idea of, and that also goes back to deconstruction a little bit, right? Of pulling everything apart and then putting it all back together again, and not accepting what appears to be the obvious. That I think is a method, maybe productive, maybe drive some people mad, but maybe it's where you need to go. Maybe it's where the artist has to go.
Can you describe, when you're doing a science degree, what the prevailing sense was of method?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. As you might know, I'm a theoretical physicist, and at the time, theoretical physics or particle physics had a huge number of successes in predicting things. I mean, now from a theoretical point of view, prior to their actual realization, and as a result, they became incredibly confident that they could almost predict what God had built. And it's interesting now, and so that was the world in which I lived in. There was a separation to a certain extent between theoreticians and experimentalists, and it got wider and wider. And now, as you look back, it's now 40 years, 30 years, or whatever. In my subject, it's kind of a disaster for the subject because they have theories that have nothing to do with reality, and they've funded themselves and to this end where they're out of touch with anything. They become mathematicians and not physicists, and the subject is in crisis because they failed. Because they got overzealous, they believed they could be God. They could, because they made a few not easy wins. They made a few clever wins that they could actually see the world. And I think that's a huge mistake to not realize that science is an experimental subject. And I think it's a huge mistake in lots of things, method. So that's the world in which I lived in, and I think that's just got worse and worse. So for me, I was not involved in that. I was involved in something that was much more practical in a sense, or tried to be more phenomenological. But that's against everybody around me was following this world of you don't need science, you don't need experiment. We can invent the world. Which I guess all follows all the way back to Einstein and the success of science in the 20th century.
Can I just ask a question there, Patrick?
Yeah.
You've got this particle physics,
Yeah.
looking ever more for the more and more finite particle, and now I think they've asked for several billion more pounds or a whole pot of international funding to get the next beyond the Bose-Hicks or whatever it's called, the next
Yeah.
part I'm looking for. So that is that what you're talking about, that kind of realm?
No, I mean, I'm really thinking of now. I really think it's really more as so that would be those people are experimentalists, and they would argue that they are in touch with reality, and they have had successes. I'm more thinking about the people who invent ideas and things that experimentalists might try and find. For example, the Higgs boson, which was obviously a great success. But that's, we're back in the 70s when that was predicted. But from maybe 1980 to now, they've been trying to find a theory of the universe, theory of everything, right? Which would be like string theory, which is incapable of predicting anything and is very unlikely to ever predict anything. And yet, most of particle physics money in theory goes into that field. So you end up with a theory that has nothing to do with reality or nothing to do with physical reality. And that's the state why particle physics is in a mess, or theoretical particle physics is a mess, because they fund projects that have no relevance. And with the Large Hadron Collider predicted to discover thousands of things and discovering absolutely none of them, the dilemma gets worse. So maybe that nightmare's kind of over for particle physics, and it will find some other way to evolve. But yeah, that's kind of the background against which I was thinking about method, right? Because method for me is about interaction between theory and experiment, right? In science, that's very important. And some people would argue that it's almost metaphysical what string theory is, but I would guess it's a branch of mathematics, not really a branch of physics. Yeah.
I thought what you mean is that there are many like scientists, they made up the paper just to put something together and rename it. But
Well,
not
I mean, we're not talking. We're talking about like the brightest minds in theoretical physics for 40 years went down this path, right? They dominate. Those are the people who dominate all the funding, right? And everybody followed them, right? But it led nowhere. It's leading nowhere. It's obviously leading nowhere.
but maybe
The whole
it
generation of
goes to
physicists.
somewhere.
It's not going anywhere. Well, maybe it's going somewhere in 1,000 years. It's not going anywhere now. It's not
Yeah,
a productive line of research. It's predicted nothing, and it's not likely to predict it. It's now reached the point where they know they won't predict anything. They don't expect to predict anything. It's at the point it's not a theory anymore.
I wonder, more in the fine art context, whether or not the core axioms for research were not simply pragmatic and limited, and that they've had a similar 30, 40-year process of leading nowhere because they've got the axioms wrong.
I mean, I was doing this research on the Deleuzian method for my talk, and I was thinking how interesting it is, this idea of continuous feedback into the process. There's no separation between method and practice. They're one, and the one affects the other, and the other affects. And that seems to me the productive way to move forward. And both in art, science, and in philosophy. There's no stable ground is what I think is interesting. is once you accept that things are very dynamic and you continuously look for creative ideas, then I think you will be productive. What happens if you don't is you become dogmatic and you go nowhere. The creativity disappears.
May I ask what is axiom that you said?
Predicate,
Sorry.
predications or
I didn't catch the question. What did you actually say?
So Jonathan mentioned the axiom. And what is that? Is it predication?
It's like a rule, if you like. It's like this is the way things are. This is the axiom of,
Do you mean that in the art world for the research paper, it is problematic because of the axiom?
well, if the axioms become blind, there's a problem.
Are you talking about like the measure of art, the measure by which
Way
to view
with
art?
measurability, isn't it? It's the desires for measurability, ultimately.
Yeah, I think maybe it's a problem of having, or the attempt to have a kind of scientific or scientific-ish approach to looking at art, like as research. That's to me that's like a huge problem and ruining like what ruining our own process. I mean, that's my experience. Like, I find it like the question of method. I was thinking about it. I was thinking about it earlier today, and I was just kind of daydreaming earlier and just realizing like that is the moment sometimes when you just stop thinking that that's when your best ideas sort of flow to you. And it's not that you're not thinking about things and that's not producing that at some point, but it's like measuring that becomes a kind of weight on your mind as an artist. I feel when you're trying to think about your art in the context of research. Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like it's this very uncomfortable relationship which doesn't really, it doesn't work. I feel like that's the presentation that you made. It feels like that's what it was talking to, like this difficulty or impossibility. And art doesn't want to be measured by something outside of itself, but it's the measure is the mind body, the measure is the relationship between, yeah, yeah.
It's almost like the measure needs to come in afterwards. It's interesting when Patrick was talking about the philosophers who were almost running too fast. It feels like sometimes when you're making art, you run too fast. You don't realize actually where you've gone or where you've ended up until you're there. And then there's a process of sort of stepping back, I think, and looking at how you got there or you are actually at. But if it's a sort of, if it's consciously step by step, I don't think, for me, it doesn't work either. As Sam was saying, it's almost like it needs to be an emptying out and a sort of a rush at it, and then a discovery later on as to where you ended up.
I think we're frightened of two conditions. One is that everything is less than measure, and the second one is that it could be potentially more than. So this uncertainty of is it less than or is it more than, and not knowing whether it's less than, that you finish up with something far less than what might be evenly if we're common.
Sorry. Sorry to interrupt.
But art as research is the anxiety that we might finish up with less than something, less than the average condition of what art normally finishes up as. Seeking a rule beyond the less than condition.
Do you think that we're looking at art as research as a jumping off point because art is reaching another crisis of why does it need to exist or what can it be in this contemporary situation?
Well, that's the anxiety out of which it was born. I mean, it was a solution for the academy to the question of relevance.
Is it also a solution if we're unable to judge anymore? If we're unable to trust ourselves to judge or to critique? It gives us some sort of scaffolding in which to judge.
I think there's a really interesting collision between the methodologies of science, the concept of philosophy being quest without finding, and the practice of an artist being allowed to be whatever the heck it is, including lying. Like one of my favorite things that Jonathan ever said was all artists are liars and should be. Yeah, I was like, yes, you did. We were talking about even artist statements. It can be a poem, it can be a fiction, it can be an alter ego, it can be a lie. It doesn't matter. And so I think it's funny because now I think sort of like as the condition of practice, as the condition of chameleon, or not even chameleon, but just omnivorous, I suppose. Like if a practice has the right to posit that it thinks like a scientist, but because it's art, it only uses those pushing off points to get some sort of new vision or new impetus. It sort of co-ops the propulsion device of philosophy and science, but it's not bound to those things all the way through to the end because it's art. You can say, oh, well, my practice is to stop here and then believe in pixie dust and fairies because that's my practice. Because that's how it works in my methodology or something. I don't know. I think that the fact that it is art is the thing that unmoors it from that dialectical, from the tyranny of the dialectical, maybe.
I want to give an example of some definition. So I have a mathematicism friend, and he told me that math is not defining as science. And I searched about that, and it is defined to be not science. So it would be math is a category, science is another category. And why math is not science is because math cannot be proven, but it can exist itself. And math can be a tool for science to use. And that totally changed my mind, because I used to think mathematics, they are also a part of scientists, but they are not. And even inside mathematics, I have friends in data mathematics in a PhD, and another is pure mathematics, and they think each other like the data mathematics. She thinks that the pure mathematicist is the fine artist in math, and the pure mathematicist, he thinks that the data mathematics is scientist. That's some interesting fact that happens.
I just wanted to, I mean, yeah, no, I can't really answer. Maybe you've got something to say about that, Jonathan, but I did want to say something else completely different.
Go on, you say it.
Well, I was just thinking about this year's Turner Prize and the four contestants, if you want to call it that. And for me, the outstanding total person who won it, Jessie Darling, I was thinking about when we were talking through this whole thing, I was thinking about, well, what's his method? And at a certain point, all the other artists also talked about, I guess, their method as well in these little film interviews. And the other three artists, you could say, yes, they did this and they did that and did that. Yeah, and there's a logic to that, and I can see it, but none of it really, maybe one or the other ones completely transformed. But Jessie Darling had this vibrancy and energy and flow in his work that was really exciting. And I was just thinking now, well, what was his method? When he talks about that, a lot of it's just intuition and then a language, his own language. And he talks about apparitions. He's dreaming, he's hallucinating, and it gives him this bit of knowledge, his own knowledge, and then he brings it into his art. But there's no recourse to philosophy anyway, in his film, he didn't talk about that. And it's just his own language.
It's energetics, isn't it?
Sorry?
It's a form of energetics.
Energetics, did you say?
Energetics.
Sorry, I didn't catch the word.
Energetics.
Yeah, energetics. Well, yes, but there's also something else going on because you can see the kind of logic in what he does, in that his work is, let's say, recognizable. So I think this is why people get so confused about method, because you can't pin it down in practice anyway. I'm not talking about theory, I'm talking about practice. It's very hard to pin.
Isn't that the essence of it? If you cannot, I mean, going back to my Deleuzian stuff, I mean, it would argue against that you can find some overarching thing outside of, going back to this theory and practice, as if there's some theory that is separate from the practice that you could isolate. It doesn't exist. Well, they both interact continuously, and the whole creative process is the fact that each is evolving with the other. They're not separable at all. They're but one. So you make the piece of work and it changes your theory, and your theory changes the piece of work, and they continuously interact in some creative becoming. That's what Deleuze would argue. And it seems to me that is the creative act. And the minute we start axiomizing or separating the two, we end up in some dilemma, which if we leave them apart too long, if we theorize or if we ignore theory, either one, it leads to a dilemma. They both need each other. And method is often an attempt to theorize the practice, which I don't think works in that sense.
Yeah, I agree with that.
You're a Deleuzian.
Finally.
Have you got, Patrick, have you?
I have a talk, if you
Yeah.
like. It's probably quite theoretical. Shall I try?
Yeah.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, I do my best to try and explain what the Deleuzian method is. I'm not 100% sure I understand it, but let me try myself. So this is just a paper I wrote, or something I wrote. So if it gets too boring, stop me. The Deleuzian method. I plan to elucidate Deleuzian method by following his interrogation of what it means to think and how his analysis might function as a methodology of invention. In so doing, I aim to elucidate how Deleuze's work allows us to reconceive practice of study and the practice of study and the Deleuzian conception of thinking as a form of activity in which the theoretical work is a concrete activity that intersects and engages with its object. Deleuze's work continually intersects with other domains, such as literature, science, and the visual arts, but at the same time is preoccupied with the specificity of philosophy. For Deleuze, philosophy is the art of forming, inventing, and fabricating concepts. That is, it is a specific practice with its own philosophical object. If philosophy is the creation of concepts, what of its others? How might philosophy encounter the work of art or science? Philosophy does not take art or science as its object, and neither does it engage with their practices. Indeed, this very incapacity forces the philosopher beyond reflection upon the object and the limitations the concept would place on objecthood to present philosopher's other as a practice in its own right. Thus, for Deleuze, philosophical practice relates to other practices with its interference, which it interferes. Hence, philosophy intersects other domains of creation. Theory, too, is something which is made, no less than its object. For many people, philosophy is something that is not made, but is pre-existent, ready-made in the prefabricated sky. However, philosophical theory is itself a practice, just as much as its object. Supposing the study of art no longer reflects upon art as its object, how would it affirm its creativity while preserving the practice it hopes to interfere with? Get to the next page, sorry. Deleuze, Kant, and the transcendental empiricism. I wish to develop and trace Deleuze's path through aesthetics to his method of transcendental empiricism. Deleuze's empiricism is not the doctrine according to which the intelligible comes from the sensible, but rather a concern for the concrete richness of the sensible, resisting universalizing abstraction by emphasizing the particular. Deleuze's empiricism starts from the assertion that there is a difference between real difference and conceptual difference, and locates this difference in the being of the sensible. The sensible for Kant. For Kant, the sensible differs from the concept insofar as the concept determines the possibility of repeatable experiences that are identical in their organizational form, whereas the sensible is the unrepeatable actuality of any given experience. This sensible falls outside the concept. Thus, the sensible is the indifferent occasion for actualizing a representation whose nature and qualities are essentially determined by the concept. The particularities of the actual here and now, sensations of representation, are merely extrinsic and are equivalent from the standpoint of knowledge. The road to the transcendental method. In his works on Nietzsche, Kant, and difference of repetition, he criticizes Kant for formulating his post-Kantian method and formulates his own post-Kantian method. In his text, he criticizes Kant for assuming there exists a harmony of the faculties subsumed under the rule of understanding. For Deleuze, Kant fails to provide a true grounding principle as he stops short of providing the real conditions of experience, giving us only the conditions of possibility. In the final analysis, Kant resorts to common sense, compromising critical philosophy. However, Deleuze sees Kant's discussion on the sublime as the discordant harmony of the faculties as opening towards a transcendental experience of the faculties. Moreover, Kant's recognition of the role of temporality in the move from I think to I am, and what Deleuze describes as the constitution of the fractured I, Kant is also pivotal for Deleuze in recognizing ideas as problems. At the center of Deleuze's conception of transcendental empiricism is the concept of the idea, providing the true synthesis between sensing and thinking. Far from having as their milieu good sense and common sense, ideas determine only the communication between discordant faculties. Kant was the first to provide the example of such discordant harmony, the relationship between imagination and thought, which occurs in the case of the sublime. There is, therefore, something that is communicated from one faculty to another, but it is metamorphosed and does not form common sense. We could just as well say that there are ideas which transverse the faculties, but are the object of none in particular. Perhaps in effect, as we shall see, it will be necessary to reserve the name of idea, not for the pure cogita, but rather for those instances which go from sensible thought to thought, and from thought to sensibility, capable of engendering in each case, according to their own order, the limit or the transcendental object of each faculty. His profound theory of ideas was problematizing and problematic allowed him to discover the real source of the dialectic. However, because Kantian critique remains dominated by common sense and the dogmatic image, Kant still defines truth, the truth of the problem in terms of the possibility of finding a solution. What is missing is the internal character of the problem as such, the imperative internal element, which decides in the first place its truth and or falsity, and the measure of its intrinsic genetic power. Kant's enterprise multiplies common sense, making as many of them as there are natural interests of rational thought. Deleuze's transcendental empiricism seeks the genetic principle of accord behind the product of common sense. In so doing, it abandons the dualism of sensing and understanding by inventing the concept of ideas, which reunite the two parts of the aesthetic so unfortunately dislocated, the theory of forms of experience and that of the work of art, of experimentation. Deleuze defines transcendental empiricism as follows. Empiricism truly becomes transcendental and aesthetic as an apodectic discipline only when we apprehend directly in the sensible that which can only be sensed, the very being of the sensible, difference, potential difference, and difference's intensity as the reason behind qualitative diversity. It is in difference that the movement is produced, as in effect that phenomena flash their meaning like science. The intense world of difference in which we find reason behind qualities and being of the sensible is precisely the object of superior empiricism. Deleuzian idea. The idea is a multiplicity, a discordant harmony of independent faculties, none of which legislates for the other. The divergence of faculties of thinking, imagining, feeling, and sensing in their transcendent exercise gives rise not to a common sense, but a paradoxical sense. The elements of the parasense are ideas, precisely because ideas are pure multiplicities which do not presuppose any form of identity in a common sense, but on the contrary animate and describe the disjoint exercise of the faculties from the transcendental point of view. Ideas are thus multiplicities with differential glimmers, like will-o'-the-wisps, virtual trails of fire from one faculty to another, without ever having a homogeneity of that natural light which characterizes common sense. Ideas contain all the varieties of differential relations and all the distribution of singular points coexisting in diverse orders of perpetuated in one another. When the virtual content of an idea is articulated, the variety of relations are incarnated in distinct species, while the singular points which correspond to the values of one variety are incarnated in distinct parts characteristic of this or that other species. The idea of color, for example, is like a white light which perpetuates itself, the genetic element and the relation of all other colors, but it actualizes in the diverse colors with their respective spaces. Thus, with actualization, a new type of species, a part of distinction takes place of the fluid idea. Distinctions recall the determination of the virtual content of an idea differentiation. We call the actualization of the virtual interspecies and distinguished parts differentiation. It's always in a relation of differentiation of a differentiated problem or a differentiated condition of a problem, the differentiation of species and parts is carried out as though it corresponds to the case of the solution of a problem. Deleuze is against the ready-made concept cut off from its genetic elements in experience. We are moved to think as a result of unexpected encounters when events make their signs to us. Ideas are responses to signs of problems conveyed to us by intensities we encounter within ourselves or coming from the outside. They are unconscious, impersonal, incorporeal, imperceptible differential multiplicities. They are thinkable as problems which generate their own solutions. The virtual and the actual, being equally real, are immanent to one another. The actual is a product of the virtual, which in turn is the power of its production. The genesis takes place in time, not between one actual term, however small, and another actual term, but between the virtual and its actualization. In other words, it goes from structure to incarnation and from condition of the problem to the cause of its solution. Turner is an example. The key to Turner's work does not lie in curing the disharmony of man and nature, but in liberating the light and color as an element of desire in themselves. Turner reaches a kind of creative madness. In 1834, Turner frees himself from black and looks for the most beautiful coloration, color for color's sake. You would say he's mad. The works of Turner prove to me that we must be free of all ideas of imitation and copying, and that the hues must be created. Turner has unleashed the power of change in intensity of light and color within the framework of nature and the human form. The intensity of Turner's colors as it flows through the painting, the effect does not take place through the mediation of reflection upon the painting, but rather the cognitive command over the senses is overwhelmed in favor of a pure sensual intensity. There is a real catastrophe in Turner's late paintings as opposed to a represented catastrophe. The method of dramatization. In 1968, Deleuze posited a method of dramatization in response to the limitations of the Kantian schema. A reconception of philosophy and the practice of theory will not be descriptive, but will be dramatized. Dramatization designates the renewed and distinctive relation between thought and sensation, between idea and spatio-temporal effectuation, that is, ultimately between thought and what it thinks, or between theory and practice. Philosophy practice becomes a creative activity, the unfolding of the idea, its determination in space and time, its manner akin to the Kantian schema, in a manner akin to the Kantian schema, but divested of Kantian's appeal to the predetermined identity of the concept and the corresponding presupposition of harmonious relations between thought and sensation. Deleuze's method of dramatization explores the synthetic power of the schema beyond limitation, implying not only a renewed conception of essence and a new image of thought. Thinking operates between differential determinations of the idea in thought and its dynamic unfolding. It actualizes in space and time, but in so doing does not presuppose a corresponding correspondence or harmony between the two. Instead, it constructs or creates this relation through synthesis of difference that does not appeal to pre-established identity. In concrete, a theoretical practice constituted on this basis attempts to produce in practice what it describes in theory, while overturning the distinction between the two. A creative constructivist theoretical practice that operates in relation to, but not in reflection on or about it. As dramatization, this entails the differential production of an idea, that is, an account of what it is, and through the exploration and experimentation, the particular concrete cases of which this idea has efficated. These cases are conceived as objects of distinctive practice, not subject to the imposition of conceptual framing.
Can we all have a copy of that?
Yeah, I think requires some
Sorry about that.
thought.
No,
Right?
but it's right. It would be great if you're open to sharing it, because I think there are so many sentences that are fantastic unpickings. Like your arguments are worth considering, a la mode as well.
Sure, I can send it. I'll put it in the WhatsApp.
I love this notion of dramatization. Just this notion of this relationship between thought and sensation.
I think in 68, this would be just before Difference and Repetition, he wrote, Deleuze never liked giving talks, but he gave a talk on to some philosophical conference, which was his paper. And I think the method of dramatization kind of disappeared after that. It got mentioned a little in Difference and Repetition, but it was just elusive. It was just, what followed was this idea of, I call it transcendental empiricism, which runs throughout his work. But yeah, that's where it came from. And I think it's it relates to Nietzsche, right? I think dramatization was a concept he got from Nietzsche.
Patrick, could you maybe expound on your understanding of Deleuze's concept of intensities and how it relates to perception and sensibility?
I think, his concept of intensity is drawing from, I think he draws it from thermodynamics, and the thermodynamic idea of things like temperature and stuff. And the way that it cannot be separated, right? You can't it's not divisible into parts. So that's one aspect of it.
It's also effect, isn't it?
Yeah.
Effect is intensity.
I think it's also a matter of how you measure it, right? I mean, it's not. It's.
But is it fair to
It's not.
say that intensity is kind of something that in and of itself, and it's not, let's say, bound to a concept or a cultural interpretation?
Yeah. I mean, it's also coming from. It's also coming from Spinoza, I think, this oneness, this inseparability. And it's also heavily linked with this high idea of immanentia, which is really important to Deleuze's philosophy, which actually is the essence of this idea of dramatization and everything. Actually, immanence is really important to the whole thing. The here and now, whatever.
I mean, it's taking apart Cartesian thinking, though, more than anything else. His way of thinking about sensation. I mean, the whole aim of Cartesian thinking is to get rid of sensation and effect, to get rid of the bodily.
Like to get rid of the bodily as an invalid or unreliable
Source of errancy.
yeah, a source of errancy. Interesting that our lived experience would be a source of errancy as opposed to a source of knowledge.
And would the connection between intensity and perception be that intensity is something that's there, but perception, you're applying, let's say, a concept to it? So that's how you interpret the intensity. Would that be a fair way of describing it?
Intensity seems to be it's different in kind to perception. Perception. I mean, in the sense that one is immanent and the other isn't. I don't know where I'm at. I don't know. I see them as quite different things. Intensity is kind of something that you can't separate yourself from. It's there. It's
Well, you're constantly perceiving it and monitoring it, whether you like it or not.
there's no detachment, whereas that perception seems something slightly different. Perception, I think of more like the haze that you unravel in a different way. Right? It's not immanent. It's more. Yeah, I don't know.
I guess I don't know the answer. I mean, it's why I'm asking the question. And it's, for Deleuze, the concept of intensity, interests me. And that's why I was saying, earlier with the PhD, and one of the things I've been asked to look at is affect theory. And, and Jonathan mentioned affect relative to intensities. But, from what little I know of affect theory, then there is a cultural component that goes into it. Whereas my interpretation of Deleuze and, struggling through difference and repetition with the Dummy's Guide side by side with it is that the intensities stand alone. And, there isn't necessarily a direct connection to perception.
Did
Have
you?
So, Carol?
I was just going to say, you had in your paper like a direct quote, I think, of what Lester's talking about, where you said the intensity of difference often is an intensity around it's around a phenomenological experience. Do you think, can you find that? Maybe we can find the hone in
Yeah,
on
sure.
spot.
So let me just.
Lester, I'm on the same, I'm running along behind you, man.
On that same page.
Yeah.
That's why I wanted to get a copy of Patrick's paper as well. And
Yes,
keep it
for this.
Sorry, just give me a sec. Let me open let me share again, and then maybe we can.
This section started the intensity of difference. ...
Am I too far down?
I think it's after Turner.
Oh, is it?
Is it? Do you remember?
Was it in the dramatization? Probably not. No. I would have thought it's before that.
Maybe it's before. No, maybe it's before. I don't have my glasses on anymore, so
Delusion idea. No, I don't think it's that.
Well, we'll have to read through it more closely to find it. Here's difference.
It's implicit there with his commentary on Turner.
Maybe it was just before that then.
It was tied up with it. The intensity of difference often is an intensity somehow related to phenomenological experience or perception. It was brilliantly said.
So what I'm looking for the word intensity. Let me just find
the difference is how it started. I'm gonna find my glasses.
Is it this bit here? Difference, potential difference, and difference in intensity are the reason behind qualitative diversity? Or you wanted something else?
It spoke directly to that question of lived experience as a valid, or you know what I mean, the phenomenological.
Yeah, the only reference to intensity is in Turner and this bit where I say empiricism truly becomes transcendental and aesthetic and apodictic discipline only when we apprehend directly the sensible, in the sensible, that which can only be sensed, the very being of the sensible, difference, potential difference, and difference in intensity as the reason behind qualitative diversity. It is in difference that movement is produced as an effect, that phenomena flash their meaning like science. The intense world of difference in which we find reason behind qualities and the being of the sensible is precisely the object of superior empiricism. And I think the example that I recall that Deleuze might have mentioned here was lightning, as lightning strikes and it traces behind the relationship between the light and the electricity that it forms. Yeah, I think that's what would go, was one of the examples he would quote with this primitive text.
Yeah, that was the spot. So how would that lightning, how would the after image of the lightning, or does that have something to do with temporalities or perceptions of the present, or is that a separate?
Yeah, I think it's temporality is always important for Deleuze in that when he talks about difference, it stems from the fact, it partly stems from the fact that everything is temporal and nothing could be the same because time is never fixed and nothing is out of time. It's always within time and therefore always different from Deleuze's perspective, which he gets from Bergson. But I think the relationship between the afterglow and the effect is this burning of intensity and the production of difference in itself. It differs from itself, is what he would say, in its own very production, in its very creative act, in its genesis, is difference in itself.
Like it has incarnations within its genesis. The genesis is powerful, like the intensity of the genesis is powerful enough to create.
And it's also never itself, right? It refuses to be subject to an identity, the identical. It refuses to let it be bound by the concept. He will say it's creative and never can be bound. Each time it's different. And that's kind of its intensity. It's true. It's this, I didn't talk about it at all, but we should have really gone into detail about the notion of singularities and individuation, which is at the heart of all this. All of this intensity and difference is rooted in the individuation, and the singular points that get created and connect everything. And they're members of this multiplicity, but there's he's got so many concepts floating around, it's difficult to go into everything. But these would be singularities that get created, and I think it kind of enacts the whole, there are a number of singularities that create this clap of thunder, this lightning act, which kind of instantiates his idea of what he takes from mathematics, of a dynamic system. And another way to come at all this is actually look at it from the perspective of dynamical systems. He's really, I think that's the way Manuel Deleuze expresses all this. He would argue that Deleuze is, in his talking about virtual and actual system, is just describing the mathematics of dynamic systems, which do go a long way to describe the genesis of many things in the world. And he's dipping. I mean, Deleuze would argue that he's not doing mathematics, and that may well be interesting, but that isn't a source. He's trying to go beyond that. But yeah, you can look at it that way as well. And these intensities will creep into that theory, or in that theory. So.
It seems like the singularities created through these intensities, these great intensities, are perhaps the anti-methodological, right? And perhaps that's the math. Like if intensities are a 1 and the methodological is a 0, one leaves a trace and one doesn't.
I mean, you can trace his idea back to, that if you go back to Leibniz, who's basically came up with the last great theory of God, and posited that each individual is a monad. They call it monad, sorry, and each individual the world is within each one of these individuals, and they're all in harmony with each other, and they all perceive they all have their own perception on the world, confused perception of the world, and God somehow brings them into harmony, and in this dynamic, there were many possible worlds, but only one of them is the best possible world. It's the one with the most diversity in some sense. And God has no choice but to produce this particular world. Well, these monads might be thought of those as singularities, but they're all very ordered. And what Deleuze does in his philosophy is he argues that they're not actually ordered. They're not held together. This harmony is broken, and so Leibniz introduces the idea of incompossibility. So that would be things that cannot be in the same world. Adam couldn't be have not sinned and sinned, one or the other, and the world where he sinned is the best possible world. Well, in Deleuze's construction, Adam sins and doesn't sin, and all possible worlds are in this virtual world, and each one of these is its own singularity. So this is the virtual milieu. And out of that, actual realities emerge as singularities. So I guess that's the idea, is thinking of this lightning that claps. It's one of them. And it's a creative act. It's unconstrained. No longer is God in control. It's no longer, what would you say? It's no longer, I've forgotten the word. It's now nomadic. It's no longer monadic. It's now nomadic. These monads, these singularities have escaped, and the world is, out of the milieu of chaos arises these creative acts. That's another way of coming at the whole thing. And that is a way of coming at perception, because he will argue that perception is all about these monads perceiving their own little version of the world that's right in front of them. Monads being us.
I can see how this would start to dance next to the nihilism that we were talking about earlier. Like, here comes all of the chaos.
Exactly.
And the death of God. Or actually, not the death of God. It's more like the emasculation of God. Like, if God is no longer in charge.
I mean, Deleuze would say he believes in God, right? But he believes in the God of Spinoza. And the God of Spinoza was an atheist. I mean, Spinoza, on the other hand, proved that God existed in line 3 of his thesis. So it's a strange God, but basically it's a God of nature, I think. It's basically nature, the milieu of nature that we're talking about.
It reminds me of the quote that in Jonathan's presentation saying, one doesn't put the question marks deep enough. And who said that?
It is deep enough down.
Deep enough down.
I think Deleuze would agree with that.
I don't remember who said that.
So
Wittgenstein.
Wittgenstein. So I searched this because I don't remember who said this, and the first come up is that don't put a question mark where God put a period. It's another quote from somewhere. It's like just conflicting idea.
So is there anything overall? Any thoughts? Does it make does it make it even more difficult, or is it?
And I somehow feel it's not leading to the nihilism because I think you emphasize some of the points that Deleuze like they brought up again. So which means that you think something is very important, not really leading to the nihilism.
You know, I mean, when he was after what is it, schizophrenia, and the book after Indifference and Reputation, the first book with
Anti-Oedipus.
Yeah, they started putting into practice a lot of these ideas, and part of that was like pushing oneself psychologically to the limit, right? And taking drugs. And it was actually quite dangerous for some people where they went, and ended up. It's quite controversial because they were effectively letting go, and there was danger of people going mad, committing suicide, from their method of schizophrenic analysis. So it was really, when they played it out, quite controversial. But they were always looking for something, something deeper, something deeper.
I like it to be ended in something deeper.
What time is it? Just a minute.
10 to.
Yeah, because Sam P was going to present tonight, but maybe it has to go till next time.
Next week. I think.
Would it be okay? I can't come next week, but could I do it the week after?
Yeah.
Cool.
So what's going to come next week?